Don't you know this is a place for fun? The question sliced through the smoky air before anyone even noticed who it was aimed at. The landing strip, a worn-down civilian bar sitting just beyond the wire of Alcom Berry Joint Operations Base, hummed with the kind of noise only peacetime arrogance could produce. Laughter, cheap liquor, the metallic thump of boots on tile. In the corner booth, Major Evelyn Reed sat quietly, untouched glass of water beside a thick technical manual on polymorphic frequency-hopping algorithms. The red neon from the beer sign trembled across her pages like a pulse. She didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to Courage and Honor, Veterans TV channel, so you never miss these fascinating tales of courage. And let us know in the comments where you're watching today. 3 officers peeled away from the bar like sharks scenting blood. Lieutenant Colonel Vance led, chest out, smile sharp. Behind him lumbered Captain Miller, thick-necked, thick-minded, and First Lieutenant Thorne, whose entire personality was borrowed laughter. They moved as one loud organism, aftershave, bravado, and boredom. Vance leaned over her table, invading her quiet. "Reading a book, Major?" Didn't realize this was the library. Reed didn't flinch. Her finger marked the line she'd been studying. "It's a technical journal, sir." The words were soft, deliberate. "Technical," Vance echoed, glancing at his entourage. "One of those new diversity hires from command, big brains, no social skills." Miller snorted, cracking his knuckles. "You look tense, ma'am. Relax, have a drink with us." Reed raised her eyes, cool gray, meeting his brash grin. "I'm fine, Captain. I'm waiting for my transport." That single sentence, perfectly measured, pricked something fragile in him. He sneered. "See, that's your problem. Too formal, too cold. You're not a robot, are you?" His hand tapped the cover of her manual. "What's this garbage anyway? Signal propagation. Nobody cares. We fight our wars with screens now." When she didn't rise to the bait, he grew louder. The audience at the bar turned, entertained. "Come on," Miller said, seizing her glass of water and tossing it aside, liquid splashing across the floor. "Let's get you something real." The sound of her book closing was almost gentle, a whisper before a storm. "That was unnecessary, Captain. What's unnecessary is you acting like you're better than us." Miller's voice broke through the music, his face tightening. "You need to learn some respect." He drew his arm back, a clumsy haymaker telegraphed a mile away. Patrons gasped, but the punch never landed. Reed moved, not flinching, not reacting, but executing. Her body pivoted with economy. Right foot turned, left hand guiding his wrist past her ear, right hand locking his elbow. Momentum betrayed him. His own strength folded inward. In less than 3 seconds, he crashed to the sticky floor with an ugly thud. She hadn't struck him. She had simply redirected the equation until his variables collapsed. Silence rippled through the bar. Vance and Thorne stood frozen, disbelief wiping the smirks from their faces. Reed straightened, perfectly balanced. "Transport's here," she said evenly. She collected her manual, slid from the booth, and walked out through the red neon haze, leaving behind a groaning captain, 2 stunned officers, and a crowd that had just seen arrogance rewritten into humility. The neon sign flickered once more, painting the floor in shame. Outside, the night air bit cold against her skin. She didn't look back. Correction had already begun. The fluorescent lights of the base clinic were merciless, sterile, bright, and unflattering. Major Evelyn Reed sat on the edge of the examination table, her reflection in the stainless steel instruments looking colder than she felt. The young Navy medic, barely out of school, documented a bruise along her cheekbone where Miller's knuckles had grazed her during that brief. "Perfect redirection." "He got a piece of you, ma'am," the medic murmured. "For the report, what happened?" "I was assaulted by Captain Miller at an off-base establishment," she said, her tone even, detached, the same voice one might use to report the weather. He threw a punch. "I defended myself. Did you strike back?" "Negative. I applied minimal force to neutralize the threat." The medic nodded, typing steadily, careful not to meet her eyes. "Understood. Photos are logged. Do you wish to file charges with the MPs?" "I'll submit a formal report," Reed replied. An hour later, the small military police station hummed with tired routine. Coffee, floor polish, paperwork stacked like bricks. She sat across from a staff sergeant who listened intently, his pen scratching across a standardized form. Her report was concise, chronological, devoid of adjectives. She recited the names, ranks, sequence of events, like entering data into a machine. "You're certain you didn't provoke him, ma'am?" the sergeant asked carefully. though the doubt in his tone was protocol more than suspicion. "I was reading a book," Reed said. "My presence was the provocation." She signed the report, accepted her copy, and stepped out into the night. The sodium streetlights washed the world in a pale mechanical glow. The papers in her hand felt heavier than they should have, small rectangles of order in a landscape of chaos. Back in her temporary quarters, the room was military minimalism incarnate: a narrow bed, a laptop, a single suitcase. The only personal object was a small framed photo of a dive team surfacing through choppy black water. She sat, opened her laptop, and connected a thumb-sized encrypted module to the port. The screen bloomed with cascading data, radio frequency analysis, raw spectral noise. Buried within the meaningless chatter of Wi-Fi, cell towers, and bar security signals, she found the unique signatures of Vance, Miller, and Thorne's phones. She cross-referenced timestamps, one cluster marking their swagger toward her table, another a frenzy of calls and texts in the aftermath of the fight. Panic had a digital signature, too. She saved everything, encrypted, cataloged, undeniable. Her breathing slowed as the adrenaline drained, replaced by the calm satisfaction of precision. The military taught men like Vance to fight wars with volume. She fought with proof. Minutes later, she left her quarters, dressed not in uniform but in a specialized black swimsuit, hair tied back tight. The corridor was silent as she crossed toward the flood pool, the base's deep-water training tank used for submarine escape drills. The old Master Chief Torres, her former instructor, sat by the console like a weathered statue. "Clearing your head, Major?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Calibrating," she replied. Without hesitation, she slipped into the dark water. The shock of cold bit at her lungs, a deliberate pain, a reset. Down she went deeper until sound itself dissolved. The pressure grew, a steady, crushing embrace. Most people found it suffocating. Reed found it clarifying. Suspended in that abyss, she let the night replay, the mockery, the violence, the silence that followed. The bar had been a test, and she had passed. Down here in the silent blue, there was no ego, no hierarchy, no rank, only physics and control. When she finally surfaced, the world above felt lighter, almost fragile. Water streamed down her face as she exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing with quiet resolve. Pressure, she thought, doesn't break you, it refines you. The morning brought no peace, only paperwork and politics. Major Evelyn Reed woke to the sterile hum of her quarters, already aware that the gears of the institution were turning, and not in her favor. By sunrise, Lieutenant Colonel Vance had already filed a counter-complaint, a calculated preemptive strike meant to bury her before she had the chance to stand. In his version of events, she was the aggressor, unstable, intoxicated, and insubordinate. He claimed she had made inappropriate advances toward Captain Miller, and when rejected had lashed out violently. It was an old playbook, and in the quiet hierarchy of the military it was one that too often worked. The report landed on Colonel Evans's desk before hers did. He sat behind a fortress of files, the kind of man who measured every word before speaking it aloud. To him, it wasn't a question of truth yet. It was a problem of command optics. On one side, he had a lieutenant colonel and two trusted subordinates presenting a polished, consistent narrative. On the other, a single major on temporary assignment, whose written report read like a machine log. He sighed, rubbing his temples, and called in Major Calloway, one of the sharpest minds from the JAG office, a man with the patience of a saint and the instincts of a prosecutor. "I've got a problem, Calloway," Evans said, sliding both reports across the desk. "Two stories, both impossible to verify. One is theatrical, the other clinical. Thoughts?" Calloway skimmed the pages, eyes moving quickly. Vance's version reads rehearsed, too neat, too emotionally curated. Reed's is factual, stripped of color. People rarely lie in such sterile language. My instinct says she's telling the truth. Instinct doesn't carry weight in a hearing, Evans replied. Politics do. He leaned back, gazing out the narrow window where the flag outside rippled in the desert wind. For now, I'll schedule an Article 32 preliminary hearing. Keep them separate until then. And since she's assigned as a supplemental analyst for tomorrow's Cerberus Sentinel exercise, let her work. Let's see how she performs under pressure. The following dawn, the operations center came alive for the largest cyber warfare simulation of the year. Cerberus Sentinel was no simple drill. It was designed to break people. The NSA's Red Team had spent months preparing the assault. A full-spectrum digital invasion meant to cripple base communications, radar, and defense systems. Lieutenant Colonel Vance stood at the head of the command table, barking orders with his usual self-assured confidence. Monitors flickered around him, screens alive with streaming data and tactical overlays. At 0600, the simulation began. By 0615, the base was digitally dead. No communications, no radar, no visual feeds. The main holographic map, once filled with neat blue icons, now bloomed into a chaotic storm of red static. "We've lost the satellite uplink," an airman shouted. "Drone feeds are looping false visuals," another cried. Vance's command devolved into panic. "Reboot firewalls! Reroute uplinks! Isolate the network!" His voice cracked. The room pulsed in red light, alarms blaring, a symphony of failure. In the corner, nearly forgotten, Major Reed sat at a secondary terminal meant for low-priority signal analysis. She hadn't been assigned to lead. She'd been sidelined. But while the others flailed against the chaos, Reed listened to the rhythm of the interference, to the patterns hidden in what others dismissed as noise. Her hands moved over the keyboard in silence, bypassing the corrupted internal systems. She patched into an old Cold War-era SIGINT array on the base perimeter, a relic she knew how to resurrect. What she saw on her screen wasn't red icons or radar ghosts, it was frequencies. Cascading waterfalls of energy and timing. The attack was brilliant, an adaptive polymorphic virus that changed its digital signature every microsecond. But it had one weakness: coordination. The enemy needed a single pulse to control the chaos. Reed found it. A fractional delay in the frequency hop, a digital heartbeat almost invisible. Her eyes narrowed. "There you are." She wrote a counter-signal, elegant and minimal, designed to ride that command frequency straight back to its source. When it reached the enemy's core, it would whisper one command: "You've already won." For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then the red storm flickered. Static vanished. Alarms cut out. The holographic map cleared, leaving only one blinking red dot, the Red Team's hidden command node. Colonel Evans froze, disbelief painted across his face. "Who the hell stabilized the network?" he demanded. A trembling airman pointed. "Sir, all logs trace back to Major Reed's terminal." Every head turned. Reed sat calmly, fingers still poised above the keys, her eyes on a single glowing line of text. Correction was achieved. The silence that followed was total, so complete that the hum of the servers sounded like thunder. Colonel Evans stared at the wall of restored green status lights, struggling to reconcile what he had just witnessed. The NSA's Red Team, the most advanced cyber warfare group in the country, had simulated an attack designed to cripple a military installation for hours. Major Evelyn Reed had dismantled it in minutes, without rank, without authority, and without raising her voice. Minutes later, Evans received a terse encrypted message from NSA Command: "Threat neutralized. Base operational. Identify Major E. Reed." It was both a question and an order. Around the room, whispers spread like static. Officers who had mocked Reed as the weird tech major now looked at her as though she had rewritten physics. Lieutenant Colonel Vance, Captain Miller, and First Lieutenant Thorne stood together near the operations table, pale and wordless. Their entire fabricated narrative was evaporating before their eyes. The woman they'd called unstable had just proven herself indispensable. Colonel Evans stepped down from the command platform, his boots clanging against the grated floor. He didn't glance at Vance. He went straight for Reed. "Major Reed," he said, voice stripped of all formality. "Walk with me." In his office, he closed the door behind them and gestured for her to sit. On his desk lay 2 manila folders, Vance's embellished report and Reed's precise account. He held them up. "These," he said, "have been on my mind for the last 24 hours. On one hand," he lifted Vance's report, "I've got a story about an emotional, unstable officer with a grudge. On the other," he raised hers, "I have a disciplined account of self-defense. Until 10 minutes ago, I had no way to tell which was real." He dropped both files onto the desk. "But after what I just saw in that operations center, one of these stories became laughably impossible." Reed sat still, hands folded neatly. "You've earned this command's full attention," Evans continued. I'm assigning Major Calloway to conduct a complete Article 32 investigation into the incident at the landing strip. He'll get the truth." Calloway, who had been quietly observing, nodded. "Major Reed, I'll need your statement and any evidence you've collected." "I have evidence," she said simply. "Audio from the incident, security camera angles, and RF signal logs from their personal devices. Time-stamped." Calloway blinked. "You recorded them?" Reed's expression didn't change. "Documentation is part of process, sir." Evans leaned back, exhaling a slow breath that turned into a short, incredulous laugh. "They thought they were in a bar fight," he murmured. "They had no idea they'd walked into an intelligence operation." 2 days later, the Article 32 hearing convened inside a dark-paneled courtroom on base. The air was tense, thick with the scent of starch and polished wood. On one side sat Vance, Miller, and Thorne, their uniforms immaculate, faces carved with arrogance. They believed this was a formality. Rank and familiarity would protect them as it always had. At the other table sat Major Reed, alone. Her posture was straight, calm, deliberate. She looked neither defiant nor afraid. She looked ready. Major Calloway presided as investigating officer. He began with Vance. The lieutenant colonel took the stand like a man performing theater, measured concern, careful diction, a script rehearsed. He described Reed as erratic, volatile, and intoxicated. Miller and Thorne followed, echoing every line, synchronized like backup singers. They smirked as they sat back down, certain the show was theirs. "Major Reed," Calloway said, "you've heard their statements. Your response?" "They're false," she said evenly. "And I can prove it." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Calloway raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." He dimmed the lights, then projected security camera footage from the bar. Though grainy, it was damning. Vance and his men approaching, their aggressive body language unmistakable. Then the swing, the fall, the quiet control. Still, Calloway wasn't done. From his briefcase, he retrieved a small digital recorder, placed it on the table, and pressed play. The room filled with sound, the hum of the bar, Vance's booming voice, Thorne's snickers, Miller's mocking taunts. Every insult, every laugh. The clink of the glass thrown to the floor. Then Miller's growl, "You need to learn some respect." The grunt, the scuffle, the dull thud of his body hitting the floor. And finally Reed's voice, calm, unbroken. "Transport's here." When the recording ended, silence reclaimed the room. Vance's face drained of color. Miller stared at the table, jaw tight. "Furthermore," Calloway said, clicking to another projection, "we have the cellular data logs collected passively at the scene." The screen lit up with time-stamped text messages. "These show Lieutenant Colonel Vance instructing his subordinates to get our story straight, less than 2 minutes after the assault. Including this," he pointed to a line on the screen. "Just say she came on to you and got angry when you said no. They always believe that. We'll bury her." The words hit like an explosion. Vance's head dropped. Miller's breathing quickened. Thorne's mouth opened, then closed again, useless. Calloway turned to the presiding colonel. "The evidence speaks for itself. It did. And it was merciless." The presiding officer's voice broke the silence like a blade drawn from its sheath. "This hearing is concluded." His tone was glacial, deliberate. "The charges against Major Reed are dismissed with prejudice." Then his gaze shifted hard as iron toward the trio at the defense table. "Lieutenant Colonel Vance, Captain Miller, First Lieutenant Thorne, you are hereby remanded to custody, pending court-martial for assault, conduct unbecoming an officer, and perjury." The guards moved in. The 3 men who had strutted into the room as if protected by their rank now looked like ghosts wearing uniforms. Reed sat motionless, hands folded on the table, her expression unreadable as the men were led away. She neither smirked nor gloated. For her, this wasn't victory, it was correction. A broken system briefly reminded of its own rules. When the heavy doors closed behind them, the room exhaled. Major Calloway gathered his papers and looked over at her. "You could have let them destroy you," he said softly. Reed met his eyes. They underestimated documentation. A week later, the entire base assembled on the parade ground under a clear blue sky. The atmosphere was heavy, anticipation laced with embarrassment. Everyone had heard the story by now. The bar, the assault, the exercise, the hearing. The rumors that had painted her as unstable had been obliterated by evidence and results. Colonel Evans stood at the podium. His voice carried across the ranks. "This command failed Major Reed," he said plainly. "We allowed rank and reputation to cloud judgment. We nearly punished integrity instead of arrogance. That ends today." He paused, his words cutting through the wind. "Competence and character are our true currency. Not swagger, not connections." Then a black staff car rolled silently to a stop beside the platform. Flags fluttered from its fenders. The crowd straightened instinctively. From the car stepped a 4-star general, the commander of United States Strategic Command himself. The parade ground froze. "At ease," the general said, his calm authority spreading like gravity. "I am here to correct the record on Major Evelyn Reed." He turned toward her where she stood at attention before the formation. She was not here on a temporary duty assignment. She was part of a classified talent management initiative, Project Chimera, designed to identify officers capable of operating beyond conventional parameters. A ripple moved through the formation. The general's voice remained steady. Major Reed didn't just stop a simulated attack. She rewrote the foundation of modern cognitive electronic warfare. He reached forward, unclipping the gold oak leaf from her shoulders. From his pocket, he produced 2 gleaming silver stars. "By order of the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense," he declared, "Major Evelyn Reed is hereby promoted to the rank of Brigadier General, effective immediately." A stunned stillness swept the field. Then Colonel Evans' command cracked through the air. "Attention!" The general stepped back, saluting her. "Welcome to the General Staff, Brigadier General Reed. Your new command is Project Chimera." Among the onlookers, the disgraced officers, now stripped of insignia, stood under guard, forced to witness the ceremony. The general's voice turned cold. "Captain Vance, step forward." He hesitated, face pale, until the guards nudged him forward. 3 paces from Reed, he stopped, trembling. His eyes flicked to the silver star on her collar, the future he'd thrown away. "Render the proper courtesy," the general ordered. Vance swallowed hard and raised his hand in a broken salute. Reed returned it with the precision of a blade. No pity, no triumph, only a quiet finality. When the ceremony ended, the crowd began to disperse, murmuring, still in disbelief. The old Master Chief Torres pushed through the ranks, approaching her with his slow rolling gait. He held out something small, a faded patch from the dive school where she'd trained years ago. "Figured you might want this back, General," he said, voice rough but kind. "You earned it then. You've earned it now." She took the patch and nodded once. It was a silent exchange, soldier to soldier, past to present. Later that evening, in her new office, large, bare, and echoing, Reed stood by the window watching a sleek unmarked transport jet being fueled on the runway. Her desk was almost empty except for her laptop, the same technical manual that had started it all, and the old diver's patch Torres had returned to her. Next to them lay a framed insignia, a phoenix rising from flame, its base engraved with a single phrase, "Fides in tenebris." Faith in darkness. She opened a new secure datapad. The title on the screen read, "Project Chimera, Initial Operations Briefing." She took a breath, the faint hum of servers echoing through the room. The mission was already loading. Correction was achieved.